Morena koutou, ko Lienshu at toko ingoa. Thank you very much on behalf of the KVH team and board for being here today and for being here to visit or to listen to our first panel. So Mike has already introduced our panellists. We've got 3 kiwifruit industry chairmen, so thank you very much for giving up your time today, as well as Stuart from Biosecurity New Zealand. They're going to share their views on the kiwifruit industry's journey in biosecurity. So I'll start by asking each panellist what biosecurity means to them and the organisations they represent, followed by some questions about how their organisations contribute to biosecurity resilience for the kiwifruit industry. Then we'll open up to questions from the floor, so you've got the opportunity to pick their brains as well. So Simon, I'll start off with you as the KVH chairman. Can you tell us what does biosecurity mean to you and in your role as KVH chair?
Yeah, to me, biosecurity is about protecting what we've got, about protecting our lifestyle, our income, our properties. It's a lot like having insurance, something that you hope you never need, but when you do need it, it's vital to have it.
Simon, KVH is unique amongst the horticulture industry in that we've established regulatory plans to manage biosecurity risk. From your perspective, can you comment on how the PSA Pest Plan and now the Pathway Plan provide useful tools to guide the industry towards biosecurity best practice?
Yeah, it's about having plans in place before something happens. So I think when PSA arrived, as an industry, we weren't prepared for it. So, for a long time, we didn't know what we were doing or how we were going to respond. So having plans in place before that happens makes a huge difference to the response.
Thank you. And we'll head across to Nathan. So Nathan, what does biosecurity mean to you and your role as Zespri chairman?
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. Kia ora tātou. Morning, everybody. Hey, just before I start, great to have winter chill as a grower. Better than spring chill, eh? So let's just, enjoy what we've got here first. Look, probably just from two aspects, if I can, Leanne. One from a sort of a grower perspective, and then one from a Zespri perspective. I mean, and Cookie and Mark here, and many of you in the room were here through PSA. So once you've been through that and you've been through a really significant biosecurity event, it never really leaves you. And what I think it also does is basically make sure it really sharpens your mind that actually you're not just a grower or a or someone who's contributing. It's actually part of your community as well. So that a lot of these biosecurity events, they don't just affect people individually. They affect whole communities. And so I think that from a grower perspective, so when you see something that's a little bit smaller, and I'll pick on wild kiwifruit, which many will be having along our gullies and neighbouring to our orchards. So when that sort of small issue comes up, then you're more attuned to it. So you're more likely to, just as Simon sort of said, react to it ahead of time or react to it in time. So that's probably a reflection from a grower perspective. From a Zespri perspective, obviously with the governance hat, and I just recognise Craig Thompson here, fellow Zespri director and KVH director here as well. Good to have you here, Craig. When Craig and I sort of think from a governance perspective, when you got Zespri, quite a large organisation, as you understand, but you look at it from a risk perspective, and so part of our role is to really look at the enterprise or the industry risk right across the board. And so what you could imagine then, there's a lot of different risks there. Right, and biosecurity is one, and so it's our role to make sure that it doesn't get lost in the overall risk register, if you like. So it pops up. So that's really our role to make sure that it does get the limelight. And it would be remiss of me, Leanne, not to say that I think it's a masterstroke from the industry to create KVH. Because that basically makes sure that it's always there, up in lights, from a biosecurity risk perspective. So, I think from an industry perspective, when I think about from a governance, it's great to see, that single focus on biosecurity that we've got within the industry. So, okay. Sorry, a bit longer than Simon, sorry.
No, totally agree, Nathan. So Zespri Innovation contributes a significant amount of value to the kiwifruit industry, including a biosecurity portfolio that partners with KVH. From your perspective, can you tell us how this innovation to address key biosecurity gaps and readiness has helped KVH improve preparedness for growers within the industry?
Yeah, okay. I won't, steal Chendon's thunder later on after lunch. But probably if you step back firstly, from a Zespri perspective again, I think one of the things that we don't necessarily appreciate enough here in New Zealand is actually the international connections that Zespri brings to that. And so, when we have offshore growers, we have offshore teams, there's actually a lot of work that goes on, as part of the sort of overall surveillance intelligence, right across, the world. An example of that is, I was in China a couple of months ago, and we've actually got a small team there in China, and they'd really put together quite a significant list of, what they were sort of seeing. And so I was able to deliver that back to KVH, in the form of a book. And so just the first thing is the surveillance, I think, is really important. That we don't often talk about that, Leanne, but I think that's really important to make sure that we get that surveillance right and the value that can bring there. And then from an innovation perspective, it's really around making sure, okay, in partnership with KVH and really driven by KVH, where do you want Zespri to focus biosecurity against those emerging or known risks as well, to make sure that we get the funding right in the right buckets so that we're as prepared as we possibly can. So I think that's the overall one. And if I just pick on a specific example that I think of the last decade, which I think is of significance, which we don't often talk about enough, I think, is around our fruit fly preparedness. The protocols that we're able to basically use in terms of the cold disinfestation and the work that took. That was multi-years to get that right across different fruit flies, with a Queensland fruit fly or Mediterranean, but it took a lot of coordinated effort. And that's now benefiting our offshore growers, in other markets, but it's also ensuring that from a New Zealand grower perspective that we're actually ready. We have that protocol in place. So, I think that's just a great example of where it goes from an emerging risk right the way through to preparedness and readiness. So, yeah.
Thanks, Nathan. Mark, can you tell us what biosecurity means to you with your grower hat on, and then also with your NZKGI chairman role?
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. I think for me, the biosecurity is that one of the largest silent risks that we have not only in our industry but for our country, because obviously a lot of things around the country will have an impact on a biosecurity risk back onto Kiwifruit. And I think, I was going to use the word security blanket, but Stu's, I'll use the word net from now on. It's probably a better analogy. But I think we're lucky with the security net that we have. And I think moving forward for me, it is going to be how we use technology, because I think one of our, Stu has asked that what is our biggest risks, and for me that's us, that's humans, and how we're going to use technology to be able to work against that in the future. And I think we're in a good position, but I think it's come about. Nathan mentioned PSA. It's come about though from being put in a situation where we had to act, and we had to act fast. And I think it shows what we can do as a group of people collectively. But now where the situation we're in now, it's more a move towards looking forward. Attacking the problems, not being on the defence all the time. And I think that's where our biggest gains come from, is where you are able to get some clear air and think about the future, and manage those risks to the best of your ability. And I take Stu's point. We don't know what we don't know, and there are always going to be risks that are going to be very difficult to manage. But we're lucky as a kiwifruit industry, especially with PSA, being so collective, being able to manage a process and work our way out of it.
Yeah. So in addition to your NZKGI chairman role, you also have a post-harvest hat as the chairman of the Apata Group. From your perspective, can you comment on the importance of biosecurity to the post-harvest sector?
Yeah, and with my Apata hat on, we also export avocados, and part of another business we are tied up with. We import a lot of vegetables back into New Zealand, and so there's lots of aspects there, and you know I do see the challenges between different countries' biosecurity policy, but also the risk that can pose to either the supply of fruit onto our market, fruit and vegetables consistently onto our market at a affordable price, but also the political angle. And so I think it's something that we see raise its head every now and then is making sure that we understand policy, we're on top of it, we understand the risks of our, they might be diseases, whatever they might be, but and that they're not used as a political football. And I think that's where making sure that we're fit for business ourselves, we understand what our risks are and we're able to manage them. But you know, I think as we move forward, we do see a higher, you know, our food supply becomes more important. We're seeing that all around the world, and so making sure that our government agencies have the tools and funding that they need to be able to work on our behalf is really important. And then locally, you know, we're all dependent on exporting kiwifruit. That is most of our livelihoods. And so to have an organisation like KVH, when I think about my role at NZKGI, you know, we're lucky to have an organisation on our back doorstep like KVH. And our role I see now is to challenge, and that is to, and I mean by challenge is to when KVH are going through the process of development of new policies and etc. It's our job to take part in helping them refine those, and then support the rollout of those to our industry. And you know, though it's not biosecurity, we're seeing, you know, the rollout of a support mechanism created by the industry and KVH around disaster. And so our organisations just continue to evolve, and we use and utilise to the best of our ability. And I think that shows a great initiative from our industry as a whole.
Thanks, Mark. Stu, can you tell us what biosecurity means to you in your role as Biosecurity New Zealand Deputy Director General? You've had a number of roles within the ministry. What does it mean to you personally?
Yeah, look, I mean, personally, it really is, you know, it's about protecting and looking after New Zealand, really, and everything that goes with that. And you know, as we know, as I said earlier, our primary industries and how important they are to the economy and our livelihoods, really, and our natural environment, which, you know, New Zealand's a pretty special place, and I think we are really fortunate. As I said earlier, that we haven't been impacted to the same extent as other countries have overseas with pests and diseases. We've seen what they do. We've seen what they do to our, you know, our native wildlife and our fauna. We know what they can do to our crops and our forests and our pastoral primary industries. And so you know, we're really fortunate and lucky in that regard that we've got a pretty special country, an economy that's based on growing and producing things really well in high quality and that the rest of the world wants to buy. So biosecurity is about protecting and looking after all of that and doing the best job we can. And so for me personally, you know, it's a great job to be in and a great opportunity to be in this role. You know, head of Biosecurity New Zealand, working in a space which is so important for New Zealand, and every day, everything we all do collectively makes a real difference to New Zealand. And so that's really what it means to me. And you know, as I said earlier, my role and our role as Biosecurity New Zealand is looking after that system and doing the best job we absolutely can, keeping ahead of things, keeping the system you know, fit for purpose, delivering and meeting those high expectations for everyone in terms of you know, looking after New Zealand.
Thank you. Recently, there's been a lot of media, but also discussion across the industry about cuts that have been made within the government ministries, including Biosecurity New Zealand, to save costs. Can you talk about how these reductions in staff level may or may not impact work Biosecurity New Zealand does with the horticulture industry?
Yeah. So obviously, as everyone knows, we've had to make budget cuts and cost savings across the public service. Just like everyone else, really. All businesses as well. It's a tight fiscal environment, and everyone's had to look at tightening things up and finding savings and being more efficient. And public service is by no means immune to that. So, the expectations are really clear with the incoming government and for budget this year. In MPI's case, so that was a 7.5% savings that we had to take out of our budget. Look, the context of that as well is, the last 6 years, the previous 6 years, there was a lot of growth in the public service, of course. MPI also grew by quite a bit during that time. A lot of that was funded directly by programs that the government wanted done and delivered. We also had things like in Bovis and other areas in biosecurity where we had growth. So what we've had to do as a result of that, like I say, is deliver some efficiencies and find some ways of saving, but not compromising our biosecurity system and not compromising what we have to do for biosecurity. We by no means have cut and reduced back to 2017 levels. We've retained, a fair amount of the investment and what has gone into the biosecurity system over that period of time. It's by no means, a reduction of that sort of scale. The approach we've taken with that is yes, we've got less money. But what we've looked at as far as possible doing is rationalising and looking for some efficiencies across our biosecurity areas where we can. So the approach that I took with that was, there are areas over time, and this, naturally this happens when you're in a growth phase and you have increasing budgets. You set up and you establish more functions. Inevitably, in some areas, that leads to some duplication. So, we found we had three data system teams spread across different parts of biosecurity. So we put those together, and we rationalise those project management, advisory functions, contract management, those sorts of areas where we could find some efficiencies to group those differently. And then I've also took the opportunity through that process to make some structural functional changes in biosecurity, which I was actually thinking of making those sorts of changes in any case prior to having to make budget cuts. So we've done it as part of this process. But I think some of those changes will set us up stronger going forward in terms of how we organise some of our response readiness functions, our pest management, getting a stronger focus on that, and getting more breadth of leadership across some of those areas too. So some of those things are beyond budget saving changes. But look, overall for biosecurity, there were no programs. There's been no programs or areas of work that we've actually stopped and shut down and we're not doing anymore. Because when you look across the place in Biosecurity New Zealand, generally all the work we do and all the projects and the programs and the teams that we have, they're all delivering important bits of the system. So it wasn't a case of shutting down or stopping whole areas of work. It was actually finding ways that we can be more efficient within that, and living within our means, which so we've done that now, the things that you see and want and expect from us, will continue. We'll continue, working in partnership, delivering the things we need to. There will always be trade-offs, of course. There will always be things that we know, endless list of things to invest in further and put more money into, put more resource into, even in the best of times. We can't do that. And we are in a more constrained environment, so we just need to make some of those trade-offs. As far as we can, we do those collectively and put the problem on the table or the priorities on the table, we kick them around. And out of that, we figure, which are the highest priority things that we put our effort in, and which are the ones we can maybe live with, that we don't put as much of a strong focus in, but we maintain the biosecurity standards across it all.
Excellent, thank you. I have an additional question for Simon before we go to the audience. Simon, you're a Nuffield scholar and you chose to do your project on biosecurity to benefit the kiwifruit industry. Can you talk about your experience with seeing offshore production systems and biosecurity, and how did that compare to what we have in the kiwifruit industry?
Yep. So one of the interesting things is when I look back at what happened in PSA here, I distinctly remember sitting in the Orchard Church in early 2010 having Shane Max talk about this disease they were seeing in Italy, and we were all sitting there thinking, oh gee, that sounds terrible. It's a good thing we're so far away from Italy and that we're different because we're better growers than the Italians anyway, so it'll never affect us. Yeah. 6 months later, we were back in that room having a very different conversation, and that was the one thing I noticed when I travelled around and looked at incursions around the world, was that it was always, they knew there was something coming, but they were all sitting there thinking, it'll never affect me, you know, we're different, we're far enough away, it won't impact us, so they were doing nothing before it arrived. I talked to a grapefruit grower in the citrus industry in Florida that got devastated by HLB or citrus greening, and they were saying the same thing. It's like, oh, we're grapefruit growers, that affects oranges, it won't bother us, we're fine, you know, we don't need to do anything. Same with banana growers in Queensland, that it arrived into Darwin 10 years before it arrived there, but they thought, oh, Darwin's a long way away from Queensland, we'll be fine, we don't need to do anything. And so until it arrived in Queensland, they didn't do anything. But once it arrived there, all of a sudden they started to put in biosecurity practices and have some of the best biosecurity practices I've seen, but it was too late because it was already there and it had already started to spread. So to me, that's the biggest thing that we need to take out of that, is that having those plans and processes in place before something arrives is absolutely critical. And to me, that's where I see KVH is different. And it's also that ability to look forward. And most of these industries never get past the first problem that they're facing, that they're, you know, just constantly trying to deal with what's in front of them. We're lucky enough that, you know, we had the tolerance with G3 that we could move ahead as an industry. And so we were able to get into that situation where we were able to think, all right, we've kind of got this under control, but what's next? You know, what's the next thing that's sitting out there that could do this to us again? And so, I see that that's probably the unique difference that we have, is that ability to be forward-thinking, you know, as was just commented on, and prepare for that next thing. And so that if it does arrive, that we're in a better place. Because, you look at the PSA response, in that first year, we had no idea what we were doing. We had to wait for the science to catch up, and that's where you lost, you know, your advantage. And I contrast that to where we've had the fruit fly response I was involved in 2019. You know, I rocked into that, and people knew what was happening straight away. We've been through several different fruit fly responses, so we knew what we were going to do. So the minute that the switch was flicked on that, there was people getting on the ground, and within days, activity was already happening, and we knew what we were doing. So, you know, being able to be prepared and have those plans in place makes a huge difference in terms of the speed of that response.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. We'll go to the floor. Lisa, do you have any Slido questions?
I do. A question for the panel in general. Are there any obstacles hindering our biosecurity efforts that we can overcome?
It's a very big question.
The one word that comes to mind to me is complacency. Yeah, that's part of the problem, is that as an industry we recovered from PSA so well. I mean, we were incredibly lucky that we had G3 that was tolerant. Yes, good luck, but also great management and planning in the background that we actually did have other varieties that were available. But you go and see these some of these other industries around the world, and they've never recovered from, you know, an incursion like this. And so, that is my biggest concern, is the amount of complacency in the industry and the drop off in basic biosecurity practices.
Yeah. I have a question for Stu, just while we're waiting for another Slido question. You've recently experienced a couple of biosecurity environmental responses with golden clam and kalupa. What are some of the key lessons that you've learned out of those responses that you think could help improve future responses that might happen with the industry?
Yeah, no, thanks, Leanne. Yeah, so those are two certainly in the last. Kalupa's been around for about 3 years. The golden clam, about May, June last year, I think we found that. Look, these environmental, environmental type responses or disease incursions are quite difficult. And then in the case of those two, they're actually aquatic in the water, which makes them even more difficult to deal with. And in both of those as well, it was quite clear to us quite early in the piece with the science technical evidence information we had that they can't be eradicated just because of the nature of those two pests. The distribution spread the way they spread, like I say, in an aquatic environment. So I think there's quite a few things come out of that. I think. I mean, one is certainly the value of what we have in the primary production space, where we have the GIA partnership, in terms of a framework that can guide us with some of these processes in terms of collective decision making and assessing the situation information and the way forward in terms of how we manage. Less clear cut in these environmental type pest disease issues where there isn't a clear partner like that signed up in a framework. Big lesson and helps the most in the approach is the early engagement. So early engagement and engagement with as many parties and partners as we can, getting people around the table, trying to build that common understanding of what we're faced with, what we're dealing with, the different perspectives and positions around all of that, and then trying to navigate the way forward, which again, it's really quite challenging. A broad spectrum of views and perspectives and positions with these sorts of things. There isn't an easy way forward and through it. But like I say, the engagement as quickly and early as possible, and trying to get the right mix of representation in that engagement to find the way through. And I think trying to reach, and we're not quite there with both of these, but trying to reach some agreement then on the long-term way forward has been challenging, just because of, like I say, the nature of what we're dealing with those, and the huge range of different positions and perspectives and values that everyone places from their position, where they're coming from. But trying to get to that point of landing some form of consensus on the way forward, and matched up with I guess the reality of what we're dealing with these really tricky things. Yeah. We'll probably get more of them in this environmental space.
Touch wood. Yeah. I think we're almost at time. So you got one more, Lisa?
This question actually leads on from Simon's comments, I think, about complacency, and it's for the panel. With growing risks from climate change and increasing compliance requirements in general, how do we maintain engagement in biosecurity and keep it a priority?
Well, I think it's making sure we understand what the risks are, and I agree with Simon's comments. Coming out of PSA, we learnt that there's probably a lot of things there that we should have been doing anyway, but it's amazing how we've moved on now, 2024, and we're not doing bugger all of them, as are not on the orchard for a grower. And so understanding the risk and education, I see education as a massive part of what we've got to do going forward. And we can only do that by having the information available. And this is where organisations, MPI, KVH, become so important to work on growers' behalves. Because we know, most of you here are here because you're engaged. It's the others that are not here that we need to often worry about. And, those classic stats that we talk about a lot now of 50% of orchards are managed by post-harvest, another 25% are managed by private orchard management companies. So it's the education piece for those that are not engaged, and the important role that everybody plays in making sure that we can at least try and manage the problems that we have going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So finally, we're in a room of biosecurity champions here. What would be your key message or request that you would make of each of them to take home to their host organisation or the wider industry? Just a key message.
At the risk of stealing Simon's comment, look, I do think complacency is the one. Right? If there's nothing else from this for these, the time that you're spending and investing here, is reaching out to your teams and people that you connect with, just to raise that awareness and engagement. I think that's what you can all do here, and when you go back to your, whether it's your own teams or your communities that you're a part of, is just raising that awareness and at least starting a conversation about it, that will lift it back up for those that you connect with. So that would be my comment for what it's worth.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's only so much we can do as KVH. Ultimately, it's up to you guys what you do on your own orchards. We can prepare plans, we can do all the research. If you guys don't take it up and do anything about it, then it's not going to help. So ultimately, as much as we can do on our side of things, it's up to you guys to take your part as well.
Yeah. Do you want to, Mark and Stu?
I often think about the comments, how often somebody makes a comment to me around, they come back into the country and they don't see the dog. And they feel ripped off because they don't see the dog. And I think every bit of travelling that I've been doing lately, I think I see the dog every time. But I think we throw that responsibility back onto MPI, but we've actually got a massive responsibility ourselves. If we want to preserve our industry and how well we're doing, because we're doing very well in relation to most primary industries in this country, if we want to preserve that, we've got to participate. And this is, I think, the number one issue for me in our industry at the moment is the lack of participation from growers actually taking an interest in what's going on in your industry, because it's easy to hand your orchard off to a post-harvest operator or a management company to manage, and you do your day job in town. You still have a responsibility on so many fronts, and I think we've got to get more serious about that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, look, I think echoing everything that's been said, I think it's remembering that why. Why is biosecurity so important and to our country and everything. Everything that's been said around that, and everyone doing their bit, everyone stepping up and doing their bit, playing their part. And I think in businesses and operations, biosecurity is just a part of what gets done, like everything else, like health and safety. It's something that's just part of the way the business or the organisation or the operation runs, as opposed to an add-on or something that maybe could be done in addition. I think that really is what's most important.
Thank you, Stu, and thank you to all of our panellists for sharing your thoughts. And basically, it's a massive call to action to make sure everyone's responsible for managing their own risk and that we're all accountable. So just please help me in thanking the panel.